The Christmas toast, the dining room shimmered with holiday lights, reflecting off the polished mahogany table that had hosted decades of family dinners. Candles flickered beside platters of roasted turkey, glazed ham and bowls of vegetables, arranged with the precision my mother demanded every Christmas. The air carried the warm scent of cinnamon and cloves. But for me, the evening felt cold. Long before the first toast, my mother stood holding her wineglass high, a triumphant gleam in her eyes. Her lips curled into the kind of smile she reserved for moments. When she believed herself clever, superior to family, she declared, her voice smooth and sharp at once, and to the one who actually did something with their life. Her gaze slid toward my sister Anna, like a spotlight on the star of the evening. Laughter bubbled up from my aunt, the same brittle laugh she always used. When my mother lobbed one of her Finley, veiled jabs, Anna smirked, basking in the glow of attention. Her newly minted promotion to senior marketing manager suddenly elevated to a world-shaking achievement. Not everyone can coast forever, Anna added, her eyes locking onto mine with deliberate cruelty. The table erupted my aunt's shrill giggle, my mother's satisfied chuckle, and my father's booming laugh that rattled the chandelier above. To them it was comedy. To me it was confirmation I was in their eyes. The family embarrassment, I lifted my water glass, forcing a steady sip even as my chest tightened. The cool liquid hit my throat, calming the anger that threatened to spill out. But then something shifted inside me, something sharp and unyielding. I set the glass down, pulled my phone from my pocket, and said calmly, "Interesting, too bad the lawyer doesn't know. This property was never ours to begin with." The laughter died mid-breath. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the tick of the grandfather clock. In the corner, my mother's glass trembled in her hand, a thin ring of wine spilling onto the white tablecloth. My father's face shifted rapidly. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally something approaching fear. Anna's smirk vanished. "What are you talking about?" Her voice cracked, stripped of its earlier confidence. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of years pressing behind me. Years of being dismissed, mocked, and cast as the family failure. Years of swallowing bitterness while they celebrated Anna's every move, as though she had single-handedly cured disease or built empires. At 32, divorced and self-employed, I had been their punchline. They dismissed my consulting business as freeloading, ignoring the 18-hour days, the sacrifices, the couch surfing after my divorce while I clawed my way back. But what they never knew, what I had been waiting to reveal, was that their so-called legacy rested on stolen ground. I glanced at my phone at the folder labeled insurance policy documents. Letters, deeds, evidence, proof that the house we sat in the land beneath it, and the rentals that paid for my sister's lifestyle were never rightfully ours. The silence was so heavy, it felt like it might crack the chandelier above us. I let it linger, savoring the rare sight of their smug expressions. Melting into uncertainty, finally, I said, "I've been digging into our family history. Turns out Grandpa wasn't the man you all thought he was. And this house, this entire property never belonged to us in the first place." The air shifted instantly. My aunt's fork clattered against her plate. My mother's eyes darted between me and the table, as if hoping the wood itself would swallow my words. My father gripped his glass so tightly, his knuckles turned white. Anna, always the bold one, leaned forward. "You're bluffing. You're just jealous you made that up to get attention." I smiled faintly, not with humor, but with certainty. "Believe what you want, but I have the papers. The deeds, the letters. And if you push me, I'll show you every one of them. The room was suffocating now. The aroma of cloves and roasted turkey replaced by the stench of fear. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one shrinking under their judgment. I was the one holding the cards. And they knew it. Dinner continued in uneasy silence, broken only by the occasional scrape of cutlery, but the warmth of the holiday was gone. What remained was the ghost of a truth they weren't ready to face, a truth I had carried in secret for a year, waiting for this exact moment. That night, as I left the table and stepped into the crisp December air, I felt something shift inside me. The boy they had mocked was gone. The man with the truth had arrived. And my family would never look at me the same way again. The box in the basement. The basement smelled of dust and forgotten years. Cobwebs hung like curtains in the corners. And the air was always cool. Even in summer, it was the kind of place where memories were stacked. In cardboard boxes, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to dig through them. Last Christmas, when my mother asked me to help organize the storage down there, I thought it would be another mindless chore. She handed me a flashlight and muttered something about tidying up those old papers. I didn't know then that the next few hours would change everything. I thought I knew about my family. I started with the boxes labeled in my father's neat handwriting. Taxes 1980s photos, 1972 Christmas decorations. Most of it was exactly what I expected. Yellowing receipts, fading Polaroids. Broken ornaments too sentimental to throw away. Then I found the unmarked box. It was shoved behind a stack of winter coats, sealed in plastic, almost hidden as though someone had hoped it would be forgotten. The cardboard soared with age, its lid caving in slightly. I dragged it into the light and peeled the tape back, dust rising into the air. Inside were papers. Dozens. Maybe hundreds of them legal envelopes. Folded maps, brittle property deeds. None of them looked like anything I'd ever seen before. My curiosity sharpened, and I sat cross-legged on the cement floor. Flashlight balanced against my knee, as I began to read the first document. Was a survey map dated 1963. It outlined 3 acres of land, our house, the yard, and the 2 rental properties next door. But the name on the deed wasn't my grandfather's. It read, Eleanor Hartwell. I frowned. My whole life, I had been told this land had been in our family for generations, that my grandfather had bought it outright and built the house with his own hands. Yet here was proof that in the 1960s, the rightful owner was someone else entirely. I pulled out another document, then another correspondence between lawyers. A notarized letter giving someone power of attorney. My pulse quickened as the pieces began to form. A picture I didn't want to see. Grandpa hadn't bought the property. He had been entrusted with it. Eleanor Hartwell was an elderly widow, childless with no close family nearby. According to one letter, she had begun suffering memory lapses. Early dementia. She had relied on my grandfather, who had worked for her as a caretaker, to manage her affairs, and he had taken full advantage of that trust. The letters told the story in fragments. Requests for documents, property tax filings, financial transfers. But the most damning discovery came in the form of 2 wills. One neatly typed and dated 1978. Left the entire estate to a local animal shelter. The other dated 1982. Was nearly identical in format, but suspiciously different in outcome. Get left everything to my grandfather. The signature at the bottom of the second will was shaky, inconsistent with Eleanor's earlier writing. Even my untrained eyes could see the forgery. I sat frozen, the flashlight beam quivering in my hand. My grandfather, the man my family praised as the pillar of honesty, the hard-working patriarch, had stolen everything we had by betraying a vulnerable old woman. That night I carried the box upstairs. My hands trembling, I didn't tell my parents what I found. I told them I was tired and left early. But the documents haunted me over the next weeks. I hired a private investigator, using money I could barely spare from my freelance income. He helped confirm what I suspected. The inheritance was fraud. My grandfather had manipulated the system, hidden the real will, and convinced a small-town court to accept the forged one. I spent months combing through county records, dusty archives, even newspaper clippings. Each new discovery cut deeper. The obituary that praised Eleanor's generosity, her love of animals, her donations to shelters. The church bulletin describing her as a woman of kindness and trust. The community notices about her declining health. Every page I turned painted her as someone who should have been protected. Instead, she was deceived by the very man she trusted most. And the theft hadn't just stolen her estate. It had built my family's entire life, the home I grew up in, the rental income that had funded my sister's education, the property my parents flaunted as proof of their success. All of it rested on Eleanor Hartwell's stolen legacy. What made it worse was a letter I found buried among the papers. It was in my grandfather's handwriting, addressed to my grandmother but never sent. In it, he confessed. He wrote about the guilt that ate at him, about the nights he couldn't sleep, about how he had convinced himself it was for the family's future. He admitted forging the will, admitted hiding the original, admitted betraying a woman who had treated him like family. He ended the letter with a chilling line. "One day someone will find this and they'll know the truth." I couldn't bear to speak. I was that someone. For months, I carried the weight of that secret alone. My family continued their routine, mocking me, praising Anna, pretending their lives were built on honor. I said nothing. I worked quietly, building a folder of evidence on my phone, waiting because deep down, I knew there would come a day when their cruelty would demand a response. And when that day came, I would show them that the ground beneath their feet was never theirs to stand on. That day arrived at Christmas dinner, when my mother raised her glass and dismissed me once again. And as the silence settled around the table after my revelation, I realized that Basement Box had given me more than documents. It had given me power, the power of truth, fallout, and ultimatum. The days after Christmas were quieter than I expected, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of silence that hummed with tension, like a storm crouching on the horizon. I stayed in my apartment working on client reports, though my mind wasn't on marketing strategies or deadlines. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach knotted. I knew sooner or later my family would confront me. The first call came from my father. "What the hell were you trying to pull at dinner?" he demanded, his voice tight with anger. "I wasn't pulling anything," I replied calmly. "I told the truth." "Truth?" he exploded. "You embarrassed your mother? You ruined the holiday and you dare talk about some nonsense you dug up in the basement." "It's not nonsense," I said, gripping the phone tighter. "I have the documents." Grandpa forged Eleanor Hartwell's will. He stole the property. Everything you've built your life on belongs to someone else. For a moment, he was silent. Then he said lower, colder. "Even if that were true, it doesn't matter now. It's done. He's gone. This is our home, our land. Don't you dare drag our family name through the mud." He hung up before I could answer. 2 days later, Anna showed up at my door. She didn't knock gently, she pounded. Demanding I open, I considered ignoring her, but curiosity got the better of me. She stood in the hallway, perfectly put together. As always, makeup, flawless coat tailored. Her perfume cloying in the narrow space. Her eyes, however, burned with fury. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she hissed as soon as I opened the door. Nice to see you too, I said dryly. You've always hated that Mom and Dad are proud of me. You couldn't stand being the failure, the divorcee, the one with no career. So now you've made up some ridiculous story about Grandpa Pathetic. I let her rant her words, slicing the air between us. Then I picked up the folder from my coffee table, the one I'd been organizing for weeks, and handed it to her. Read it, I said simply. She rolled her eyes, but curiosity flickered across her face. She flipped through the first few pages, her confidence faltering deeds. Maps, legal letters, 2 wills side by side. Her hands began to tremble. This doesn't prove anything, she stammered. It proves everything I said. Grandpa betrayed Eleanor Hartwell. He stole her estate. That's the truth you and Mom don't want to face. Her face hardened. She shunned the folder back into my chest, nearly knocking me off balance. Even if it's true, she spat. We're not giving it up. This is our life. Our home, our legacy. You think you can waltz in and destroy that because you're bitter. Grow up, and then in a whisper meant to wound. She added, you're not even really part of this family. You're adopted. You should be grateful. We even kept you... Her words landed like knives. I had always known I was adopted. They never hid it from me. But to hear her wield it as a weapon in that moment made my chest ache. I took a slow breath, steadied myself, and replied, maybe I'm not blood. But that doesn't mean I don't know right from wrong. Unlike you, she glared at me, nostrils flaring before storming off down the hall. That night, lying in bed, I replayed her words again and again. Adopted, not real family. Maybe that was why they had always dismissed me, always mocked me to them. I was an outsider, disposable. But if they thought that would silence me, they were wrong 2 weeks later. I sent them all an email. It wasn't dramatic. But it was firm. I laid out the evidence, attached scanned documents, and explained what I had found. Then I gave them a choice. We come clean together. Acknowledge Eleanor Hartwell's rightful heirs. Contact the animal shelter, her will intended to benefit, and start making amends, or I go public. The shelter, the county, even the local newspaper, would be very interested in a story of stolen land and forged wills. For 2 days I heard nothing. Then my mother called, her voice shook. Not with anger this time, but with desperation. Please don't do this. Think of what people will say. Think of the shame. The shame isn't mine to carry, I said quietly. It's Grandpa's. And it's yours if you keep protecting his crime. She began to sob, begging me to reconsider. But I had already made my decision. The next morning, I got a letter in the mail. Not an email, not a text. A handwritten letter from my father. He wrote that I was no longer welcome in their home. That if I pursued this any further, they would cut all ties with me. You will no longer be our son, he wrote. I stared at those words for a long time. My hands shook, but not from sadness. From clarity, I had always wanted their acceptance. Their approval, but now I realized I didn't need it. I had the truth, and I had something even more powerful. The freedom to walk away. The inheritance twist. Winter dragged on, bitter and gray. Weeks passed without a word from my family. My mother stopped calling. My father didn't send his usual curt texts about bills or errands. Anna blocked me entirely. For the first time in my life, I was completely cut off. At first, the silence was heavy. I found myself staring at my phone, half expecting it to light up with an apology. Or at least an argument. Anything. But no, nothing came. They had exiled me, and they were content to leave me adrift. It should have hurt more than it did. Instead, it felt like a strange kind of freedom. I worked longer hours, threw myself into my projects, and began to imagine a life where my worth wasn't measured against Anna's every achievement. Then one rainy Thursday, the letter arrived. It was thick, the kind of envelope that carried weight. Literally and figuratively, the return address read, Harper and Green, attorneys at law. My stomach tightened. Inside was a formal letter, crisp on heavy paper. Dear Mr. It began, we are contacting you in regard to the estate of your biological parents, Samuel and Rebecca, as their only surviving child. You are the sole beneficiary of their trust, valued at approximately $3 million. I read it 3 times, unable to breathe. Samuel and Rebecca, my real parents, names I had only seen on faded adoption paperwork, people I had imagined in dreams, but never met. I knew they had died young, in a car accident, which was why I was adopted as an infant. But I never knew they had left behind anything, let alone this. $3 million, the letter went on to explain the details. Investments that had grown steadily over decades, carefully managed by trustees who had finally tracked me down after my 32nd birthday. It was all mine, no strings attached. I sank onto the couch, the papers trembling in my hands. For so long, my adoptive family had treated me like the outsider, the burden, the one who didn't belong. They mocked me for struggling, for failing, for never measuring up to Anna. They told me I wasn't real family. And now, here it was, proof that I had a legacy of my own. Not stolen, not forged, not tainted by lies. My biological parents had left me a gift they could never have known would one day save me. When the reality sank in, I laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It was one of release. Years of bitterness and longing evaporated in that moment. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their house, their land, their so-called legacy. Built on a crime, I had my own future. Still, part of me wanted them to know. Not to brag, but to set the record straight, to show them the universe had balanced the scales in its own way. So I called a family meeting against their protests. I insisted we gather one last time in the old dining room. When I walked in, the atmosphere was as icy. As ever, my mother avoided my gaze. Her lips pursed into a hard line. My father stood with arms folded stone-faced. Anna lounged in her chair, pretending not to care, though her eyes darted to me with suspicion. You wanted this meeting, my father said, say what you need to say, and leave. I set the envelope on the table, sliding it toward them. I thought you should know, I said evenly, that I've come into an inheritance from my biological parents. My mother blinked, confused. Anna scoffed. What did they leave you, a scrapbook? No, I said. They left me $3 million. The silence was instant and absolute. My father's jaw actually dropped. My mother gasped. Clutching the edge of the table, Anna let out a short, disbelieving laugh, then stopped when she saw my expression. It's true, I continued. I have the documents, the trust papers. It's all mine, every cent. While you've spent your lives clinging to property that was never rightfully ours, I've inherited something clean, something honest, a legacy that belongs to me. My mother's voice shook. $3 million? Yes. I leaned forward, my voice steady. So when you said I wasn't real family, when you said I didn't deserve a... Dime, remember this moment. Because I don't need a dime from you. I never did. Anna's face twisted with envy, her mouth opening and closing, as if words had abandoned her. My father muttered something under his breath, too low to catch. My mother began to cry softly. the sound muffled by her hands. I stood, pushing back my chair. I came here to give you the truth. Both truths, actually, that the house you live in was stolen, and that the son you cast aside doesn't need you anymore. Not for money, not for love, not for anything. And with that, I walked out. For the first time, I felt weightless, free of their expectations, free of their judgment, free of their chains. My life was no longer bound to theirs. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled clean, like the world itself had been washed fresh. I raised my face to the sky and let the future unfold before me. I wasn't their failure anymore. I wasn't their scapegoat. I was the rightful heir to my own destiny.